Welcome to everybody that's here. I'm Bill Torbert, and we'll discuss Chapter 3 of Numbskull, Born Again and Again and Again, with the help of my co-panelists. Chapter 3 in this book follows me from the time I entered Yale through the first year after I was at Yale, when I ran the Yale Summer High School. Then later that year, that summer, I got to go over to Somalia, where my father was ambassador, sort of what luck, and work on oil exploration, where I had my first leadership experience, which is, I will read about as the one sort of short reading from the chapter. Although that was probably the height of my achieverdom, during these years, I had been discovering the redefining action logic, and also first taste of the transforming action logic. So as in all our lives, the movement from action logic to action logic is sporadic and occasional and takes a long time. With that introduction, I'd like to invite Shakiyla to share her thoughts.
Thank you for offering this fine work, Bill, and also your life experience for exploration for us, and specifically for inviting Nick and I to reflect on it with you. And as I read it and sat with it, I think a couple of things came to my mind that I really wanted to highlight, briefly, and maybe offer a related illustration from my own experience. The first thing that I was really initially drawn to was your early obsession with love that you talked about in the chapter. And then you described having this really deep mystical experience of feeling a deep love and connection, and then this letting go of around your certainty around that, which was really interesting. And in fact, you talked about, I think you described it as letting go of your intellectual superstructure, was the language you used. And realizing its incompleteness, and then also its lack of a certain internal validity. As part of my dissertation research, I convened a group of 7 women of color, and our purpose, we actually came together for an action inquiry group for a year, and our purpose was to evolve our consciousness, right? Like that was the whole purpose of the group, or really our meaning-making capacity to better manage different personal and professional world challenges that we were facing. So we met virtually for a year, and we came from, most of us were in the United States, and then a few of us were in Southern Africa at the time. And we actually took the GLP, or the Global Leadership Profile, which measures, as you know, and others may be aware, measures which action logic you are in. And a couple of us took it 2 years after the conclusion of the study. And interestingly enough, most of the group members, or all of us scored between achiever and redefining. So here we had a whole group of women who were clustered in this sort of like space between conventional and post-conventional, or that move. So I thought that was, even the fact that we were attracted to the group, I think says something about that, those action logics, right? To come together for that. So basically we had a really strong center of gravity in these particular action logics, which I think for me really offered some very interesting insights into the lights and shadows of those two action logics, and particularly that transitional space between them, I think, which we saw in your chapter.
Amidst these achiever and redefining experiences, I did have this one particular experience in Somalia. And I thought this would be the part of the chapter I would read just to give a feel for those of you who may not have actually read or listened to the chapter. So here I was after my sophomore year, after the events that Shakiyla has talked about, summer of 1963. Off I went to do geological survey work for Sinclair Oil in Somalia, where my father was now serving as ambassador. Every day we left our camp in the bush, bouncing along deeply rutted, bulldozed lines till we reached that day's work site and began drilling holes, setting charges, and recording the subsurface structures revealed by the dynamite blasts. I had only been learning the trade for 2 weeks when first Sandro and then Jami, the two Italian bosses, who translated between me and the 12 Somalos when necessary, both of them left camp on other duties, suddenly promoting me to sole leader of the subsurface charting team. I was very nervous about holding so much responsibility conjoined with so little experience, not to mention no common language with my subordinates. I was also terribly eager to have Charlie, the genial linebacker-sized Texan chief of camp, think well of what my team accomplished. One day, the line we were bulldozing began to cut right through a temporary native village of scattered huts built out of scraps of cardboard, tin, and canvas. I had been told that the government had given us the right of way in all such cases, but I was both ethically bothered by and emotionally scared of disregarding the objections of the natives. When I described the situation to Charlie upon my return, he said it was okay that I'd stop for the day, but that I ought to return and go right ahead with the line the next morning. It was important to keep it straight for research purposes, and besides, we would be undercutting both our own authority and the government's if the word got around that we could be influenced by impromptu, on-the-ground objections of squatters who had no property rights to the land. Charlie's relaxed authority made this seem reasonable, natural, all-American, and unobjectionable at the time. But as soon as I got outside his aura, my fears and concerns returned. I ventured forth the next morning with heart in mouth, hoping to get through the scattered huts early before anyone could rouse themselves to protest. But when we arrived, a whole delegation of villagers awaited us and waved to me to come with them to what turned out to be the chief's hut. An extremely old man emerged from the hut, skeletal, nearly toothless, limping on a stick, and in a thin, whining voice, he spoke a few words of English and more in Italian to me, along with rapid-fire Swahili to Sido, the Somali truck driver. Basically, the village elder was gently questioning whether I thought this action was truly just. I felt on very uncertain ground because I was clear that I did not think the action was just. But I felt just as surely that I would lose my job if I didn't follow Charlie's gentle orders. Moreover, as the ambassador's son, whose father's position got me the job to begin with, losing it seemed unacceptable and embarrassing. Here was I, the supposed power possessor, feeling a kind of horrified compassion for this poor, powerless old man, who in turn was acting like a Socratic teacher to me. I chose not to continue through the village, but rather to pick up the line on the other side. We ultimately got more done that day, cutting 14 kilometers of line, than on any other. But I expected the guillotine to fall on my neck upon my return. I delayed the moment of truth when I got back to camp by kicking and heading and kneeing my precious soccer ball in a little sand patch amidst the fierce African bush until an errant foot, knee, or head drove the ball onto a long thorn that actually popped my leather ball. Further defeated, I husbanded my hard-to-locate courage to face Charlie with what I had done. I was dumbfounded to have him dismiss the matter lightly, saying there were thousands of square miles yet to be surveyed. Now I was enormously relieved that I had acted according to my conscience. From this, I believe, I took the implicit lesson that it is good to listen to and act on our intuitions about what is just, for our fears of negative pragmatic consequences may simply be misplaced. And Nick, I think you want to talk about Africa too a little bit. But
what resonated for me with our conversation was, and the link I think is what both you and Shakiyla have talked about, which is the letting go of uncertainty and the letting go of control. My story is not in Somalia, but in Tanzania. In 1985, when I was in my mid-30s, my colleague Dave Paminter and I were invited to work in Tanzania by Chuo cha Sanaa, the National College of Arts. And the invitation was to work with staff and students at the college to develop a program of community theatre in action, and also to work with the staff and students to help them develop an understanding of the work, to include it in their ongoing curriculum into the future. And the work was funded by the British Council, which is a government-funded quasi-autonomous organisation to promote, in the UK, to promote the exchange of culture, science and education. So, I mean, Dave and myself were pretty could we say, experienced in devising such community events. We arrived with a whole lot of achiever certainties and intentions to do a good job in 6 weeks, which strikes me as incredibly achiever now, to do all that in that short time. And of course, when we arrived, nothing was as we expected, even though I'd worked at the college before. You know, the students we worked with were training to be health workers and cultural workers, youth workers, social workers. There were dancers and drummers and actors and acrobats and gymnasts. We had a whole lot of resources at our disposal. And our first challenge was that the students were from all over Tanzania. And in fact, very few were familiar with the local communities around the college. And the college was situated on the coast, opposite Zanzibar and about 40 miles north of Dar es Salaam. And the second challenge was a little bit more serious because although we were experts in ways of devising popular forms of theatre, we had to confess very quickly that although we'd done quite a bit of research, we really didn't know enough about Tanzanian history and politics and culture and society. So we realized that we were culturally, contextually out of our depth, and that we would have to work very closely in collaboration with the students, our students, and that we weren't only going to be teachers, we were going to be learners, and we would be students of our students. And I think that was, we suddenly became aware that we just had to let go of everything and open ourselves to a completely new experience. So having set aside our achiever safety nets and certainties, we entered the emergent world of collaboration and exchange. And after several days of building relationships, doing exercises, running sessions on the methodology of the work, the large group divided into small groups and went off into the community to research the issues and problems that we would then make into our scenarios to put forward in the villages. And within about 3 or 4 hours of all the teams going off into the community, they all, without exception, they all came back very dejected, because the villagers, faced with a barrage of intrusive and inquisitive and probably impudent questions about what was going on in the village, what were their problems, just chased the students away, thinking them government spies or worse. And in fact, in one village, they were chased away with a shotgun. And you know, we had to recognize that we made a fundamental mistake, which was not to consider the villagers as also our co-collaborators. So we sat down and had a collective think, and then it was proposed that we would work alongside the village headmen, and that the students would be invited into the villages as guests of the villagers. They would go out and work in the fields with them. It was the harvest time for the rice. They would stay in village homes overnight, eating with them, sleeping in under their huts. And of course, as they built relationship, as they ate together, as they gave instead of just taking, stories naturally emerged. And when they returned a few days later, they had wonderful and rich research. And of course, during that time, Dave and I had just waited at the college, just without any control whatsoever, just hoping that the universe would actually provide something. And of course it did.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm actually very fortunate to have known Shakiyla for about 10 years and am working currently with her on an action inquiry group that we are doing with a group of professional folks who work in public health. So I guess my comment is related to that and some of my work that I've done in public health for the last decade. And Shakiyla's mentioning about the deaths or the letting go or the things that you have to move away when you're developing. I don't know why. I guess maybe this was in the chapter. I listened to the chapter this morning, and while I was walking in the woods, and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I've been experiencing, is this falling away, these things that have had to go away, and it's really difficult and hard, and I don't like it a lot of times. And it's only in reflection sort of that you can see those things and maybe even some of the blessings in disguise that were there. But I'd say that my biggest example, the arc of the whole change for me so far in my life, was when I came into public health, sort of thinking that there was a way, like, we know how to do things, we can help people be healthier, we have science, we have expertise, and so on and so forth. And then trying to apply those things in the real world and finding all kinds of stuff happening. And just this letting go of thinking I know answers, thinking I can get things done quickly, efficiently, right to the point. And how I've kind of needed, or I felt I've needed permission. And I think Shakiyla is one of the people that have given me the permission to try different ways to be in uncertainty, to allow time, to allow non-expert, non-scientific, whatever, different things to come into what we know. But it has been uncomfortable. It has been like multiple deaths. And and yeah, I guess that's just what I wanted to share. That came up for me when I listened to the chapter this morning, and I was glad to hear Shakiyla reiterate it in her talk.
I worked for a computer company for 21 years. And lots of stuff happened there in terms of development. But the transformational story really comes to one day. We had a client or a customer. I don't know if in them days we used to send computers out that hardly worked at all, full of bugs and so on. And there was one particular problem, and it had been isolated to the piece of equipment for which I was a design authority, the ultimate expertise. And it used to go through channels. If somebody locally couldn't handle it, like what they would call a field engineer, then another person would get involved, who would probably somebody from the factory. And if they couldn't solve it, they called on the expert, me, right? And so I said, okay, this has been going on for a while. Tell me more about it, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, tell you what, can you get the client to get off their computer for lunchtime tomorrow? I'll come down and we'll figure it out. So I had tremendous confidence in my ability to solve this problem, because I was, logic was me. I really understood, computer logic very well. But the logic that hit me at this one was, I get down there and I've got two people trying to fix it, and they've been there for weeks. One of them was Nigel, who was a field engineer, and he had a different modus operandi to solving problems than John, who was a guy that was a kind of a quality assurance guy who worked in manufacturing. And these two guys did not get on very well together. And I kind of detected that almost immediately. And I just sort of stepped in and I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I know you, John, have got some software that you use to actually make a problem cycle. And Nigel had another piece of software. So what I did is I said, okay, Nigel, we're going to use your software to cycle around this problem and see if we can get it to repeat itself. And then I said to John, I'll tell you what, John, you just follow my instructions and we'll work this out together. Within 2 minutes, those two people had solved the problem. I told him where to hang his oscilloscope probe and things like that. And we basically detected a diode that had blown on a printed circuit board about 200 yards from where we were standing. And and then I sort of I'd said we needed an hour. We actually completed the whole thing in 15 minutes, and I was able to go home. And I just said, at that time, I said, what the hell just happened? And it was something about acknowledging for myself that one of my skills that's never left me and was there in different forms from an early age was that I had this ability to facilitate angry places and conflicts that were going on in front of me. I started doing that when I had a very fiery, angry siblings and parents and so on. So I'd got some of those skills, but here it was playing out in a completely different world. And I just learned something, and I'm not quite certain what it was, but it was something that was not about me being an expert at all, but about me being something else. And it was something about working with other people. And these days I would say I took a leadership role of some kind, and my leadership was recognized for my expertise, but the real leadership had nothing to do with my expertise as a technical guy.
Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see names of people that different ones of us have known over the years, and we look forward to continuing the process over the next months, and hope some of you will feel like coming back again as we get into weirder and weirder territory. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.